Hello everybody and welcome back to the HLTCO YouTube channel. The focus of today's video is Sheffield Wednesday and specifically their owner, Dejphon Chansiri. His story is a genuinely wild one. I will make no bones about it. It's a video that I've been looking to make for the last 2-3 weeks, primarily because a statement was released by Dejphon Chansiri not so long ago, in which he said that Sheffield Wednesday fans would have to put their hands into their own pockets to cover a £2 million bill that was owed to HMRC. Within the rambling statement that he released, he said something along the lines of, and I am paraphrasing slightly here, if 20,000 Sheffield Wednesday fans put their hands in their pockets and gave £100 each, then the £2 million bill would be cleared and all would be squared away. And obviously, whoever you support, whether it is Sheffield Wednesday, Sheffield United, Carlisle United, etc., etc., that is the sort of statement that will send alarm bells ringing in your head as to whether or not Chansiri represents someone who could be described as a fit and proper person. And in my research for this, I always expect to find out things that I didn't know before. I am a Crystal Palace fan and therefore completely neutral when it comes to a topic like this. But I always want to try and scratch below the surface to some degree and get more of a tangible feel for how a football club are actually doing when I choose to, discuss them on a YouTube video. I have to say that the multitude of different issues that have cropped up in my conversations with Sheffield Wednesday fans when it comes to Chansiri and the different ways that he has rubbed people up the wrong way, the backwards business models that he has looked to use, the exploitation of fans from a financial perspective, it is all just incredible. So much so that I'm not really sure how long this video is actually going to go on. I like to try and cram it into 15 or 20 minutes at the most, but I've got my notes prepared for this, and I have to say, if you actually look at the multitude of different things that have cropped up across the 8 years of Chansiri's ownership at Hillsborough, it is beggars belief really that he is still there and that the club are actually still functioning, albeit at the foot of the championship table as we find ourselves in November of 2023. Chansiri's time as owner at Sheffield Wednesday began in January of 2015 when he took over from Milan Mandaric. Milan Mandaric previously had come in and somewhat saved Sheffield Wednesday from potential oblivion, but was always quite clear and above board in saying that he didn't see himself as the long-term custodian of the Owls and was instead keeping the boardroom seat warm for his long-term successor. Chansiri ended up being that man, although what has become clear throughout my numerous discussions with Sheffield Wednesday fans in researching this video is that he is not in any shape or form a savvy businessman. His family wealth comes from the Thai Union Group. They actually are one of, if not the biggest producer of canned tuna in Thailand. I believe their family's estimated wealth is $575 million, or at least that was the most recent estimate that I was able to find dating back to 2020. But Chansiri himself is not the real reason for that wealth. He is merely the son of the family that owned that money. And with that in mind, I think his time in charge of Sheffield Wednesday has been one that has lurched from one calamity to another, simply because he views Sheffield Wednesday as not even his personal plaything, but something that he has taken over and something that he now has a tremendous amount of pride in trying to keep it on the rails. But as I say, my numerous conversations with Sheffield Wednesday fans have shone a light on numerous different issues that have cropped up, not just in terms of on-field decisions, managerial appointments, transfer strategy, but in terms of PR as well. The man is basically a walking disaster at this stage, and I knew that it was going to be relatively bad when I started researching for this video. I had no real concept of how bad it actually was, and the multitude of different issues that have cropped up across the last 8 years that have left Sheffield Wednesday fans, on one hand, trying to find a degree of gallows humour in their current predicament, but on the other, genuinely worried for the long-term stability of the football club, not just in terms of their place within the EFL table, but in terms of their long-term financial stability. And I don't want to make light of this situation at all. It is just genuinely mind-boggling to me that a man like Chansiri can actually be in charge of a football club the size of Sheffield Wednesday for as long as he has. It's worth saying, before we get too bogged down in the steady decline of Sheffield Wednesday as a footballing institution across the last 8 years under Chansiri's ownership, that the initial signs when he first arrived in Sheffield in January of 2015 were rather positive. They had a man who had arrived with a huge amount of money behind him, almost like a knight in shining armour for a fan base that had been through the ringer in the years prior, and he seemingly had a cohesive plan to get them back into the upper reaches of the Championship table and potentially give them a shot at Premier League football alongside it. There were tangible changes made at Hillsborough, a new pitch was laid, a new scoreboard was erected, and in Carlos Carvajal they had a manager that the fans could truly get behind once again. But what has become clear in my discussions with Sheffield Wednesday fans in researching this video is that the plan that Chansiri had was probably only ever going to last 2 or 3 years in terms of it being a realistic one. He threw an incredibly large amount of money at the project generally, with the aim of getting into the Premier League and securing the money that is clearly on offer in the top flight of the English game. But when that didn't come to fruition, it was quite clear that the lack of business acumen that was being shown by Chansiri in terms of his decision-making process from week to week was going to leave the club hamstrung massively in the seasons that followed. And now you are looking at a situation where the Al supporter base are paying the price for his financial mismanagement, not just in terms of their place at the foot of the Championship table, but in terms of worries over their longevity across the next few years, with Chansiri at the helm and seemingly no end in sight, to him to an extent holding the club hostage from week to week. When attempting to examine the financial mismanagement that has been overseen by Chansiri across his 8 years in charge at Hillsborough, it is impossible to separate transfer business from that discussion. The arrival of players like Jordan Rhodes and Alman Abdi have been headline-grabbing deals at the time, and one of the main things that has cropped up in my discussions with Sheffield Wednesday fans in researching this video is the disconnect between the enjoyment and excitement that they all felt when that money was spent to the reaction from other fan bases as they now talk about Chansiri in a negative fashion, because as far as Sheffield United fans, or indeed anyone really across the football landscape are concerned, Sheffield Wednesday fans weren't bothered when Chansiri was spending that money, and the rebuttal from our supporters to that in the here and now is that they would never have been comfortable with that money being spent had they known that it wasn't serviceable by the football club in the long term. They trusted Chansiri to be a man that was across it and a man who had the best interest of the club at heart, but instead he had played fast and loose with the financial fair play regulations, and of course they ended up being relegated from the Championship, having been deducted 6 points for being in breach of those particular regulations. And if you look at the transfer business that Sheffield Wednesday have done throughout Chansiri's time in charge, it has always been, for the most part at least, large sums of money spent on players of a bad age profile, on big wages with next to no resale value, and ultimately, if you continue to go down that particular pathway, it is a road to financial ruin. Yes, you can throw money at things, yes, you can hope that the Premier League will be that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but if it doesn't come to fruition, you will be left with a situation where there is no money to actually service these issues, and ultimately, that is why Sheffield Wednesday's fan base as a collective entity are being milked for all they are worth in the present day. Whilst it is of course impossible to pinpoint the exact moment when the tide turned against Chansiri in terms of the optics of his Sheffield Wednesday ownership, there is no denying that the 2020-21 season was when it all came crashing down around him. They were initially deducted 12 points, that was reduced to 6 on appeal for profitability and sustainability breaches leading up to the 2017-18 season in the 3 seasons prior to that. Ultimately, those 6 points ended up with Sheffield Wednesday finishing bottom of the Championship table. Had they not been deducted those 6 points, they actually would have survived 4th bottom, with Derby County dropping into the relegation zone instead. But unfortunately for Sheffield Wednesday, they did find themselves rock bottom of the Championship. Darren Moore came in at the very back end of that campaign, and he stayed in charge throughout Sheffield Wednesday's stay in League One. In my conversations with Sheffield Wednesday fans about that time, it's quite clear that for whatever reason, Chansiri decided to take a more hands-off approach when it came to his ownership of the football club, allowing Darren Moore to have a greater sense of freedom in terms of player recruitment and the general direction of the team on the pitch. And ultimately, it paid off. They eventually got themselves promoted back to the Championship through that most dramatic of winners, a Josh Windass header at Wembley in the 123rd minute. But according to numerous Sheffield Wednesday fans that I have spoken to, as soon as the Championship was back on the agenda, Chansiri became somewhat crazed once more, and that potential pot of riches in the Premier League was obviously the focus of his mind once again. And it is quite a curious situation, this, because if you are going to run a football club, eventually you would assume the penny would drop and you would leave the football people to get on with what they are good at and be that sort of owner that does stand there in the shadows, doesn't necessarily need too much in the way of praise, but will happily see the club succeeding. And I think that is really where you are finding an oil and water situation here, because I think Chansiri is someone that wants supporters, for whatever reason, to pat him on the back, to say thank you to him constantly. And when he isn't in the headlines, when he isn't the person at the centre of everyone's thoughts, he tends to get a little bit frustrated. And with that in mind, I think, the promotion to the Championship once more is something which has provoked him into being more abrasive than ever and lead Sheffield Wednesday fans to a view that he is not the right man for them at all, whether it be in the long term or the short term. Unfortunately, for a multitude of different reasons, they are in a scenario where they cannot actually separate themselves from him, which is something I will get onto discussing in a little bit more detail in a minute or two. During the summer of 2023, immediately after Sheffield Wednesday's promotion back to the Championship following that most dramatic of playoff final victories, Darren Moore actually left Sheffield Wednesday, with Chansiri himself suggesting that contract negotiations were at the core of the problems that led to Darren Moore's departure. Unfortunately for Sheffield Wednesday's beleaguered fan base, all of the positivity that had been generated by that playoff final victory was popped like a balloon. Xisco Munoz came in. He lasted 12 games from July onwards. I believe the 12 games saw 8 draws, 4 defeats and no victories, and of course he was relieved of his duties, with Sheffield Wednesday staring down the barrel of a gun once again at the foot of the Championship table. They now have a man in the dugout by the name of Danny Roll, who has previously worked as an assistant at RB Leipzig, Southampton, Bayern Munich and with the German national side, and at just 34 years old he's an incredibly green coach, of course, but someone the Sheffield Wednesday fans have immediately got behind. And in my discussions with Sheffield Wednesday supporters, the vast majority of them seem to think that he is the definition of a modern manager and someone they can really look to build around in the years to come. And I think if you look at the way that Chansiri is viewed by Sheffield Wednesday fans in terms of being the definition of a loose cannon, they are very much hoping that Danny Roll can be that long-term presence in the dugout for them. I think most have accepted that relegation is pretty much on the cards already, and with that in mind they would love nothing more than for Danny Roll to be given the time and space to truly craft a team of his own. I think in terms of the overall style of play, they have already seen improvements under his guidance, but the general suggestion is that Chansiri's personality will eventually rub Danny Roll up the wrong way and lead to a scenario that sees him exit stage left and once again leave Sheffield Wednesday fans groping around in the dark for some degree of comfort as they look to battle their way through with an owner who I think for the most part, if he does come across something that works, will eventually find out a way of breaking it. Whilst in an ideal world I would be able to present videos like this with, the definition of professionalism and just deliver it straight to camera, make sure that it didn't seem as though I was reading from a computer screen, there is somewhat of a potted history of Chansiri's 8 years in charge and some remarkable things that have occurred across those 8 years that I feel I should just read off in list form for you. So forgive me while I look to my left and examine my notes, because I think, and once again, this is something I say on all of the videos that I record, I am not necessarily making this video to shed new light on information for Sheffield Wednesday fans. It's more of a general explainer for your average man or woman in the street as to the chaos that has unfolded at Hillsborough over the last 8 years or so of Chansiri's ownership. And with that in mind, I do just want to read you this list of things in chronological order when it comes to different issues that have cropped up throughout Chansiri's time as owner. In January of 2016, the badge was changed with no fans being consulted. In 2015, a chief Buddhist blessed the ground. In September of 2016, golden elephants were placed outside the ground for good luck. In September of 2017, a cake was baked to commemorate the club's 150th anniversary. It promptly broke in half, which I think many Sheffield Wednesday fans view as sort of a symptomatic example of their football club throughout Chansiri's time in the boardroom. In August of 2018, Chansiri banned the BBC Sheffield contingent from covering games and instead insisted on charging fans £4.50 per month for the club radio service, just so they could listen to Sheffield Wednesday games being broadcast over the airwaves. And that is just scratching the surface, really, of the different examples I could give you as to why Sheffield Wednesday fans are so much at the end of their tether with Chansiri as their owner. It's very easy, isn't it, to say, be careful what you wish for. You could have an owner that, wreaks havoc on your football club. But in examining Sheffield Wednesday as a collective entity for this video, I have been blown away by the sheer variety of things that have cropped up throughout his 8 years as owner. And by the looks of it, this is not going to change anytime soon. As I say, the blue touch paper really for recording this video was that statement he released when he asked the fans to put their own hands in their pockets for the £2 million, and who knows where the next corner will lead us. And genuinely, I do feel a huge amount of sympathy for Sheffield Wednesday with this particular issue, because if I look at my own life and the way that my job and my professional life, I suppose you could say, has gone across the last 10 or 11 years, Sheffield Wednesday play a huge part in it. Had Crystal Palace not got that point away at Sheffield Wednesday in May of 2010, I wouldn't have started HLTCO, I wouldn't have had a website, I wouldn't have had a podcast, I wouldn't be coming to you on YouTube now. So I've always kept an eye on and looked out for Sheffield Wednesday, because I have this deep sense of gratitude that even though they were relegated that day in 2010, our survival as a football club, because of the administration that we were going through at that stage, has gone on to allow me to talk about my club on a daily basis for a living. So, I do feel a deep sense of gratitude towards Sheffield Wednesday for that in a roundabout way, and to see them going through so many different issues with Chansiri in charge, it is genuinely frustrating and saddening for me, and there are more examples of that as I go through the rest of this video. That lack of business acumen that I have discussed at length already in this video is on show in multiple other examples that I will try to reel off for you now in relatively quick succession, I suppose you could say. There are a number of workarounds that Chansiri has looked to implement throughout the last few years to keep the wolf from the door in terms of further sanctions or points deductions. You've got multi-year season tickets. One Sheffield Wednesday fan I spoke to said that he is seriously in two minds as to whether or not to renew his season ticket for the upcoming season, because it currently is £400, but he is now, Chansiri that is, in the middle of trying to offer multi-year season tickets to Sheffield Wednesday fans, with the 3-year option working out at £500 per year. And the suggestion is that the 1-year season ticket that will be on offer by the time the early bird deals come around in January will be in excess of £500 for a single season, despite the fact that Sheffield Wednesday find themselves rock bottom of the Championship as things stand. Alongside that, they have the most expensive match tickets in terms of one-off tickets in the league. I believe £59 is the most one individual adult has to pay at Hillsborough for a home game. They have the most expensive kits, despite the fact they are simply made by Macron. They have the most expensive tracksuits. There's no running water in the stadium. The food on offer for fans on a match day is supposedly horrendous. And whilst all of these things might seem insignificant on their own, I think when you look at the overall picture for Sheffield Wednesday fans, they have an owner here who seemingly doesn't care about the matchday experience for supporters, for making himself one of them and feeling part of the overall picture. It's all just a big pound sign to him. And this robbing Peter to pay Paul and making sure that you do offer long-term season tickets, it's all well and good in the here and now, because as I say, you keep the wolf from the door over the next 6 months. But what does that mean in terms of the long-term future of the football club? And I think that ultimately is why so many Sheffield Wednesday fans are desperate to bang the drum and get as many people as possible to realise that they are in the grips of a real crisis here, with a man in charge that seemingly shows no signs of wanting to leave, but also wants to hold the club to ransom for things like match tickets or kits. You are looking at Sheffield Wednesday, a club in a let's be real about this, a working class area of England. You know, they haven't got a huge amount of money. That is something that many Sheffield Wednesday fans have said to me in my discussions with them, and yet they feel they are being milked for all they are worth by an owner that doesn't seem to care about the general mood of the football supporters that he represents as the owner of Sheffield Wednesday. Another hugely worrying development for Sheffield Wednesday supporters is the fact that their stadium, Hillsborough, is now owned by a holding company registered to Chansiri rather than by the club itself. They rent the stadium from their owner, and in itself, you know, that can be looked upon as another financial fair play workaround. But for me, this is the absolute definition of Chansiri moving the deck chairs around on a Titanic to make sure that things work in the short term. You know, you're never going to look at a situation where a football club are renting the stadium they play their home games at from somebody else and view it as a long-term prospect. And of course it muddies the waters should another ownership model want to come in and take the club away from Chansiri, because if he is as stubborn as so many Sheffield Wednesday fans have said to me, there is a high probability that he will keep hold of that stadium for dear life and make sure that there can't be that bind between the new owners, the new stadium and the club itself. So Sheffield Wednesday fans are quite rightly very frustrated and very worried about what the long-term future spells for them. There are other issues. Elevate, a energy drink that were on the kit as a sponsor, I believe, and D Taxis have both been found to have been non-existing companies that were owned by Chansiri to put more money back into the club. And you know, this is a recurring theme for me in this video, but that level of gallows humour that Sheffield Wednesday fans have indulged in over the last few years to try and take their minds away from the potential of impending doom is now something they can no longer do. You know, I spoke to a couple of Sheffield Wednesday fans who said to me that there used to be regular jokes about D Taxis and how they were very difficult to get in Sheffield because they didn't exist as a company, and yet you saw advertising hoardings around the stadium advertising D Taxis. It is beggars belief really that this has been allowed to go on for so long, but whether or not the EFL do even have the powers to step in and take the football club from Chansiri's control, I'm not sure. You know, I'm admittedly recording this video here today, but I'm not sure about the minute details as to whether or not the EFL actually have the power to go in there and take a football club from an owner's grips whilst he is paying the bills. But quite clearly, Sheffield Wednesday supporters are at a point of no return when it comes to their views on him. And you know, you are playing fast and loose with the potential future of one of English football's biggest clubs, and it's just incredibly sad and worrying on every single level really. I'll be brutally honest with you. You know, I wanted to record this video for, you know, information really for me and for many other football fans that maybe weren't quite aware of the different minute details that concern Chansiri's ownership of Sheffield Wednesday. But over the course of the last week researching this, I have become genuinely dismayed by what is going on at Hillsborough. And, you know, you look at the overall situation in terms of the English game, I'm just not sure where we go from here really, because it is quite remarkable that a man who has played so fast and loose with Sheffield Wednesday as an institution across the last 8 years was allowed to even take over the club in the first place. You know, I've said earlier on in the video that quite clearly when you look at the money that he splashed at the very beginning of his time as owner, he had this 2 or 3 year plan in his mind to potentially get Sheffield Wednesday into the Premier League and then reap the rewards of it from there. But if you continue to prove to everybody that you don't have the level of business acumen, the level of calmness, and ultimately the level of respect for a club like Sheffield Wednesday, who are a part of the furniture when it comes to the English footballing institutions, then why are you here? You know, and that in itself is something which I just can't ever really get my head around with these owners. My conversations with Sheffield Wednesday fans have led me down a path of thinking that this is basically an egotistical maniac, someone that wants his cake and wants to be able to eat it, someone that wants to be praised to the high heavens for things that really, as an owner of a football club, should be the bread and butter of your day-to-day existence. But if you are looking back through the sands of time to 2015 when he took over from Milan Mandaric, surely alarm bells were ringing. You know, this is a man that doesn't actually have any track record in business. He has no connection to Sheffield Wednesday on an emotional perspective, and he has used it and abused it in many ways to ensure that he is always the centre of attention. You know, there have been a multitude of other things that I haven't even included in this video. Burner accounts on Twitter that are quite clearly him or members of his family, you know, talking him up and saying Sheffield Wednesday fans are wrong for having any criticism of him. There have been long-winded statements that he's released. He's had fans forums where he's rambled on at great length about not getting the respect that he's deserved, and you know, a multitude of other things that could make this video last 2 or 3 hours. I don't want that to be the case, but realistically, whether or not you are a Sheffield Wednesday fan, you might hate them, but ultimately you have to respect what they represent in terms of English football and the heritage that they have. And if you do have someone at the very top of that totem pole that is playing fast and loose with the financial security of that club in the long term, then you have to raise serious questions about the fit and proper persons test that allowed him to come in the first place. I know changes have been made. Hopefully those changes are far-reaching and ensure that individuals like this aren't allowed to, you know, be in charge of a football club, whether it be in the Premier League or even down in the National League and non-league. You know, it's something that we have seen far too often. You can look towards clubs like Scunthorpe United as, you know, fan bases that have been through it in recent years. But as I say, I was just unaware of the sheer scale of craziness that had unfolded across the 8 years from 2015 to now under Chansiri's ownership. So hopefully that has informed you somewhat. As I said midway through the video, this was never going to be something that Sheffield Wednesday fans could watch and potentially garner new information from, but hopefully I have done the subject justice. Other than that, I will leave it there for today. If you are interested, I also do record a podcast Monday to Friday on football generally over on patreon.com. It's £3 a month, and if you've liked what I've had to say here and my general tone of delivery, then potentially you will like that as well. Other than that, please do consider leaving a comment on the video, subscribing to the channel, or liking this video as well. It all helps me in terms of growing the YouTube channel and pushing it further up the algorithm. But other than that, I will sign off there for today. Wish you all a very happy day and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.